Let's break it down. Verses 1 through 4, they're in mourning of exile. So it says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. We remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of those songs of Zion. So by the rivers of Babylon, they're referring to the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers and the canals in Babylon where the exiles lived. This setting symbolizes their displacement and separation from their homeland. We sat and wept. The psalm captures the deep sorrow and grief of the Israelites as they recall their lost homeland, Zion or Jerusalem. We hung our harps. Hanging their instruments symbolizes their inability or unwillingness to sing joyfully in such painful circumstances. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. The captors mockingly demand the Israelites to perform sacred songs, adding insult to their suffering, right? So like I said before, they were mocking them, basically. It's really messed up. It's really messed up. You can hear the pain in this psalm. Every time I hear it, every time I listen to it on the audio Bible, I don't know, it just makes me emotional. It brings a tear to my eye because I just think about what they were going through when they wrote this, when they said this. So in verses 5 through 6, they talk about a vow to remember Jerusalem. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. The psalmist promises never to forget Jerusalem, emphasizing its central place in Israelite identity, culture, and faith. Then when he says, my right hand and my tongue, these refer to essential abilities of playing music and singing. The psalmist would rather lose these gifts than forget Jerusalem. So this is very strong imagery that he's using here. So in verses 7 through 9, this is a cry for justice and retribution. It says, remember, Lord, what the Edomites did. On that day, Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundation. Daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction. Happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. It's even hard to read because it's just so horrific to think this is what happened to them. So when they talk about the Edomites, the psalmist accuses the Edomites, a neighboring people related to Israel, of aiding the Babylonians and rejoicing in Jerusalem's destruction. And when he says daughter Babylon, he's personifying the Babylonian Empire as a female figure. The psalmist declares Babylon's eventual downfall, reflecting prophetic visions of its destruction. And then when he says dashes them against the rocks, this shocking and brutal image reflects the psalmist's deep anguish and desire for justice. In the ancient world, such acts were a grim reality of warfare and conquest. And this verse expresses the psalmist's call for Babylon to suffer the same fate it inflicted on Jerusalem. So like I said, we have to look at this as sorrow and lamentation. The psalm gives voice to deep grief and loss, showing the importance of expressing pain honestly in times of suffering. Let's think about that, That's a problem in church today. We go to church with our church face on, acting like we're happy, maybe when things are not, or maybe people expect you to act like you're happy when you're not. Hug your neighbor, shake their hand, right? Have you heard this in church before? Maybe I don't want to hug my neighbor and shake their hands today. Maybe my child just died. Maybe your husband just left you. Maybe your parents just passed away. Maybe you just lost your job. Maybe you're in sorrow and lament, I feel like this is a problem in church, or like we have to just pretend like we're okay and we're not. We need to be there for each other more. We need to we need to be honest. If we're suffering and we're in pain, we need to be able to disclose that to our fellow believers. We need to be able to express that and be honest and transparent with each other that we are struggling, that we do have difficult times, and we should be able to lean on each other for those things as Christians. We should be able to do that, But back to the passage. I got a little sidetracked there. So they're longing for home. It reflects a universal human longing for a place of belonging and the pain of displacement. So they also talk about faithfulness to God and heritage. So the vow to remember Jerusalem actually highlights the Israelites' commitment to their spiritual and cultural identity. Justice and retribution are also mentioned here in this psalm. The psalm's closing verses reflect the raw human cry for justice, even when it comes in harsh terms. So again, we should be able to express how we really feel. We should be able to say it if this is what we're feeling. We should be able to confess that to each other, even if it's wrong, even if it's extreme. This is what I'm going through. You know what I mean? So the tension between pain and hope is another thing. It's another theme in this psalm. So though the psalm is heavy with grief, it implicitly points to God's ultimate justice and the hope for restoration. From a human perspective, Psalm 137 is often seen as a reminder of human suffering. It acknowledges the depth of pain people can feel and offers a biblical example of lamentation. Faithfulness to God, the call to remember Jerusalem, can symbolize a commitment to the faith and the hope of God's kingdom. So forgiveness versus justice. The psalm's harsh ending contrasts with Christ's teachings on forgiveness, challenging readers to wrestle with the balance between justice and mercy. So let's talk about this in a context of Christ and today and Jesus, because of course, we're not supposed to seek revenge. We're not supposed to look for retribution. We're not supposed to be doing those things. Don't get it twisted. But like I said, we should be able to express to each other if we're struggling, if we're having difficulties, and if we're grieving and if we're in pain. So let's be clear. This is not a call to violence, but a cry for justice. The verse reflects the psalmist's longing for justice, not a literal command for vengeance, right? And in the ancient Near Eastern culture, retribution was a common expectation when one nation defeated another. And this verse echoes that cultural mindset. Christians can interpret this as a plea for God to bring about justice in His own time and way rather than endorsing revenge. So like I said, we're not supposed to get revenge on our own. We're not supposed to do that. We leave that to God. We leave that to God in His own timing and in His own way. And I can tell you in reality that it's always better to leave justice or revenge up to God, because He can do it so much better than us. He can deal with things and deal with people way better than we can. And then when we do it, it's always wrong, and we end up just doing it the wrong way, and then we end up looking just as bad or worse than that person, and it just doesn't work out. Just leave it to God to handle those things, okay? And then so we have to read it through the lens of Jesus. So Jesus' teachings transform how Christians approach such passages. His call to love your enemies in Matthew 5:44 and the example of forgiveness on the cross provide a new lens for understanding passages about vengeance, right? I'm not saying that we can't be, upset by injustice. I'm not saying that we can't feel like a zeal or like a righteous anger at times, because gosh, of course, there's really horrible things that happen to people that just should never happen. And we can be outraged and we can be very upset for these things. But we have to follow Christ's example, right? So how can this relate to modern life? The lament and the honesty of this verse is a reminder that it's okay to bring raw emotions to God. Like I said, we really, even with extreme feelings of anger, grief, and the desire for justice, that can be laid before Him. We can be honest with God about how we really feel. And like I said, we should be able to be honest with each other as Christians. Now, use wisdom. Don't just go and tell anybody and everybody, but make sure it's a trusted brother or sister in Christ, if you're gonna confess difficulties. Because if you tell somebody that isn't trustworthy, and somebody who will take that and use it against you, or go and tell other people or gossip about you, obviously that's not the person you should tell. So use wisdom when you are confessing to one another, right? So seeking God's justice, as far as that goes, Christians are encouraged to entrust justice to God rather than taking matters into their own hands. Like I said, this text is descriptive, not prescriptive. Romans 12:19 says, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath." Just let God take care of it. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't report a crime. You should definitely report crimes. Don't take it out of context. Don't be extreme. With everything, use wisdom. Use wisdom with everything, obviously. And then I'm not saying either that God wants us to let people walk all over us and continue to hurt us over and over again and let people abuse us. That's not what He's saying at all. Use your wisdom. Use your common sense. Use your logic. God gave it to you, right? We're not just, blind robots that are just oh, this is what it says and this is exactly what we do. No, that's not how it works. Like I said, if you're in a situation where somebody's abusing you, clearly you don't need to stay in that situation. And yes, you should report it to the police, but you shouldn't go and abuse that person back. That's what He's saying. That's what I'm getting at here, right? Let God deal with that person. You get yourself saved. You get away from that situation, or you get away from that toxic person. But let God handle that. Let God deal with them. And like I said, if someone's committing a crime, you need to report it. This is a problem with a lot of church scandals nowadays. People want to take that verse a little bit too far and say, oh, look, we've got this pastor who did a sexual crime, but let's restore him because Jesus said to forgive everybody, and let's go ahead and just not report it, and let's just pretend like it's okay and forgive him. No, use your brain, people. Use your wisdom. Use your thoughts and your logic. If someone committed a crime, report the crime. If a pastor committed a crime in church, report him and get him away from people. You know what I'm saying? And you know what? If you did a serious sexual crime, you don't need to be restored to ministry, because guess what? You're not fit as a leader anymore. And if you have a proclivity to doing these things, you're probably going to offend again. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm totally not down for that. Totally not okay with that. If you're a criminal, you don't need to be in the leadership. You don't need to lead a flock of sheep if you're a wolf. You feel me? Okay, that's my rant there. So ending this. So the last thing to think about is that there's hope and redemption. So even in the darkest expressions of anger or grief, Christians look forward to the hope of redemption through Christ, who promises a new creation free from pain and suffering. So as bad as it can get in this world, one day, He does promise us freedom from pain and suffering and injustice and all these horrible things that have happened from the beginning of time all the way to now. This is not a new thing. People have been enslaved and taken to other lands, and all these horrible things, wars and invasions. This has been happening since the very beginning. This is not an American thing. This is not a new thing. This is not a, Western thing. This has been going on forever. But one day it will end. God promised us that He'll wipe every tear from our eyes, and we will be in a perfect world again. So I just want to say in closing that Psalm 137 remains one of the Bible's most sorrowful laments, offering a raw and unfiltered view of the exile's grief, while also grappling with questions of justice, identity, and hope. So I hope this video helped you kind of understand this verse a little bit better as we talked about it, as we thought about it and broke it down. We did relate some of it to modern life and to Christ's teachings and what it means for today. Again, like I said, we have to learn how to read the Bible in context, learn how to figure out what is prescriptive for us and what is just descriptive. And just because it happened in the Bible, it doesn't mean that God condoned it. We got to stop thinking that. People, it's just so infuriating. You've got people who are atheists and whoever who don't believe in God, and they're just reading a verse and they're like, oh, look, this is in the Bible, this God condones this is an evil God. No, like, look at the whole thing here. I'm going to talk about this on the next video too, about this archaeological finding about the Amorites. We'll get a little bit more into that, but it's the same thing, how they say, oh, God's a genocidal maniac and all this stuff, but I'm like, oh, word, but what about what these people were doing? Is this just, what if this happened in your town? Would you be cool with letting it go? I don't think so. So yeah, I'm not going to spoil it, but we'll get into that. So yeah, I hope that you understand this verse. And like I said, again, context when you're trying to interpret the Bible.